I'd been working night security on the Ocean Serenity for almost 8 months. It was a massive cruise ship, the kind people booked years in advance, with glistening chandeliers in the atrium and a swimming pool that stretched under a glass dome. But no matter how luxurious it looked during the day, the ship was a different creature entirely at night. After midnight, the energy shifted. The music faded, the bars emptied, and the narrow hallways fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. I'd walk my rounds under the cold flicker of emergency lighting, listening to the way the sound of my own boots echoed in places that felt far too quiet. It was during one of these patrols, a little after 2 a.m., that I first heard it. The sound of footsteps that weren't mine. They were heavy, hurried, and deliberate. Not the uneven shuffle of a drunk passenger heading back to their cabin, but the rapid pounding steps of someone who was running. The strange part was that the sound didn't fade or grow louder. It stayed just behind me, as if whoever it was keeping the exact same distance no matter how quickly I turned or moved. I spun around. Nothing. The hallway stretched on, empty and still, just the soft sway of the ship under my feet. I radioed the other guard on duty, but his voice came back calm. Nothing on my side. All quiet. Still, something in my gut told me to follow the sound. I traced it down a narrow crew-only corridor at the aft, the kind passengers never see. At the very end was a door I didn't recognize. Unmarked, painted an ugly shade of gray, with no handle on the outside. It shouldn't have been there. I'd walked this hallway hundreds of times. I hesitated, but when I pushed against it, it opened with a metallic groan. A sharp breath of cold air hit me, carrying the faint smell of wet iron. The space beyond was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb, and in the center, a metal stairwell spiraled downward into shadow. I stepped inside. The sound of the running footsteps was clearer now, clanging against the metal steps below. I called out, "Security! Who's down there?" But the footsteps didn't pause. I started down, my hand grazing the icy railing. As I descended, I passed a sign on the wall. Deck 14. That didn't make sense. The ship had only 12 decks. I kept going, unease tightening in my chest. Deck 15, Deck 16. The air grew heavier with each step, the bulb's light above shrinking until I was moving through a haze. The walls were wet now, dripping with condensation, and the smell of metal was stronger, tinged with something else, something sour, almost rotten. Finally, I reached a landing where the steps ended. But instead of a hallway or a door, there was just a flat steel wall blocking the way. The footsteps had stopped. The silence that followed was almost deafening. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do, when my radio crackled to life. But instead of my coworker's voice, it was filled with faint whispers. The words were muffled, urgent, and overlapping, as if multiple people were speaking in a language I didn't understand. A drop of cold water, or at least I thought it was water, fell from the ceiling onto my neck. My skin crawled. I turned to go back up, but the stairwell behind me was gone. In its place stood another steel wall, rivets glistening in the dim light. I was sealed in. My breathing quickened, echoing unnaturally in the cramped space. The whispers on my radio grew louder, rising into distorted screams that made my ears ring. I pounded on the walls, yelling for help, until the sound of metal groaning filled the air. And then, without warning, I was standing back in the crew corridor, the gray door gone, replaced by a smooth section of paneling like it had never existed. My radio was silent again. The next morning, I checked the ship's blueprints in the security office. There was no record of any stairwell in that location. When I brought it up to the chief officer, his face tightened. He muttered, "Don't go looking for it again. Some parts of this ship don't like being found." I never worked a night shift alone after that. But sometimes when I'm walking the lower decks and the ship sways just right, I swear I can still hear it. The echo of those running footsteps, somewhere deep below where any deck should be. Working nights as a deck officer on the Aurora Star had taught me one thing. The ocean isn't empty. It's a living, breathing entity with moods, secrets, and an unsettling awareness of who's traveling across its surface. I'd seen storms that churned the waves into walls of water taller than our ship, and I'd heard passengers swear they saw figures standing out on the horizon, only for them to vanish in a blink. But on that night, I stumbled onto something that made all those experiences seem like harmless stories told over a drink. It was 2:37 a.m., and I had stepped out on the starboard promenade for my usual patrol. The weather was calm, the sea a dark mirror reflecting slivers of moonlight. But it was unnaturally calm. No wind, no rolling waves, just that strange, heavy stillness you feel in the seconds before a storm. The air smelled faintly of salt and something else, something old, like damp wood left to rot in a cellar. Halfway along the deck, I saw it. At first, my brain didn't process what I was looking at, just a shadow on the water keeping pace with us. Then the shape clarified in the moonlight. A lifeboat. It floated about 30 yards out, perfectly parallel to the ship, moving at our exact speed. No engine, no paddles, just drifting alongside us as though tethered by an invisible line. I froze. My first thought was that it was one of ours, somehow loosened from its davits. But our lifeboats were bright orange, fitted with emergency lights and identification numbers. This one was different. It was wooden, weather-beaten, its paint reduced to splintered chips clinging to a faded red stripe that ran along its hull. And then I saw the passengers, 4 of them, seated in a row, perfectly still. Their pale faces were turned forward, not toward us, not toward the sea, just forward. They didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't move. I lifted my binoculars. That's when my pulse quickened. Their clothes weren't modern. Heavy wool coats, caps pulled low, and collars high, styles I'd only ever seen in black and white photographs. And their skin. It had that color you see on bodies that have been too long in the cold, an unnatural bluish white. I radioed the bridge, trying to keep my voice steady. Possible vessel in distress, starboard side, 30 yards out. 4 passengers visible. Prepare for rescue. As soon as I said the words, the air shifted. A sudden, violent gust of wind roared across the deck, rattling the railings and slamming a door somewhere behind me. The sea, flat moments before, began to ripple with small waves, yet the lifeboat glided closer, undisturbed, like it was riding on glass. When it was only a few yards away, I saw it clearly. The wood was swollen and warped, the nails rusted through. Water lapped gently at its sides, but it floated higher than it should have, as if it weighed nothing at all. The captain appeared beside me, binoculars in hand. His jaw tightened the moment he saw it. "That's not one of ours," he said flatly, "and it's not showing up on radar." We lowered a ladder, but before it even touched the water, the lifeboat shifted. Slowly at first, then faster, it veered away from the ship. The 4 figures inside never turned their heads, never acknowledged us. The boat picked up speed, too much speed for the waves, and in under a minute it was gliding into the open fog ahead. The mist swallowed it whole. We searched for hours, scanning every inch of the surrounding water. There was nothing, no wood, no life jackets, no disturbance in the water. It was as if the lifeboat had never been there. Back in my cabin, I couldn't sleep, I dug through maritime archives for our route, and that's when I found it. In 1923, a passenger steamer named the Rosemore struck a drifting ice mass in these very waters. It sank in under an hour. Survivors reported that several lifeboats made it into the open sea. All but one were eventually found. One lifeboat, carrying 4 passengers, vanished without a trace. The last sighting described it exactly as I had seen. Weathered wood, faded red stripe, 4 silent souls. For over a century, no one reported seeing it again. Until that night. And I'll never forget the way the captain looked at me as we stood on the deck, staring into the fog. He leaned in and said, barely above a whisper, "If you ever see them again, don't call out. They're not looking to be saved." I had been a night shift communications officer aboard the Ocean Serenity for almost 10 years. By now, I thought I'd heard it all. Midnight calls from seasick guests, late-night arguments between honeymoon couples, drunken prank calls from bachelor parties. But the strangest things always happened after 2 a.m. It's when the ship feels suspended in time, when the corridors seem longer than they should be, and when the gentle hum of the engines becomes an unnerving, low heartbeat. It was 2:13 a.m. when my headset crackled alive. At first I thought it was just static from the satellite connection. But then I heard it. Soft breathing. A woman's breathing. "Please, help me, he's in my room." The voice was faint, trembling, like she was speaking through clenched teeth to keep from being heard. I immediately typed the cabin number into my console, 9B, but something didn't make sense. The cabin was marked vacant. No passengers had been assigned to it for this voyage. No keycard had been issued. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. Silence. Only the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps on a hard floor getting closer to the phone. I imagined her standing there, frozen, watching something approach. "He's getting closer," she whispered. "Please, don't let him." The line went dead. I called security immediately and dispatched 2 officers to Deck 9, Section B. While I waited for their arrival, I switched the security feed to that corridor. At first, everything was still. Then, I saw the door to cabin 9B creak open on its own. Slowly, silently, like it was welcoming someone or something inside. When the officers arrived, their radios crackled with static as they entered the cabin. One of them reported that the air was freezing cold, cold enough for their breath to fog in front of them. This made no sense. The power to that room had been shut off for weeks. The bed was neatly made, but on the pillow sat the cabin's phone. The cord twisted, the handset dangling and swaying gently, as if someone had just hung it up. The officers exchanged a look, and then one of them pointed to the wall above the bed. Carved deep into the plaster, gouging through paint and into the metal beneath, were 3 jagged words. The letters were wet, not with paint, not with ink, but with something darker, thicker. Security swept the room top to bottom. No intruder, no sign of forced entry. Yet the air was heavy with the scent of seawater and a faint metallic tang, like rust or blood. Later, I dug through the ship's old archives, searching for any past incident involving cabin 9B. That's when I found it. In 1976, during the ship's maiden voyage, a newlywed couple had stayed in that cabin. On the 4th night, the husband was found dead in the bathroom, drowned, even though the room was dry and locked from the inside. His wife vanished the same night. Her last known action? A panicked call to reception, recorded on a reel-to-reel tape. That recording was marked missing in the official log. The cabin had been sealed for years after that, only occasionally used for storage. But in the last decade, It had quietly been reopened and reassigned, though crew members whispered about strange disturbances and guests who checked out early. That night after the incident, I sat back at my desk, trying to convince myself it was just some kind of sick joke. The hours crawled by. Then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the phone rang again. The display lit up with the same number, Cabin 9B. My hand trembled as I picked up the receiver. "Please, help me. He's in my room." The voice was identical, same fear, same cracking tone. And somewhere deep inside I knew I'd be getting this call again tomorrow night, and the night after that. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.